Great. Good evening. Thank you for joining me tonight. My name is Nicole Bryant. I'm the Director of University Counseling at St. Mildred's Lightbourne School. Tonight we'll be talking a bit about international applications, so the US-UK application process, which is a little bit different than when applying in Canada. So we'll start off with talking about the UK system, talking a bit then about the US, and then capping our evening off with a conversation about our professional internship, which takes place with our grade 11 students at the end of their year, and how those experiences for our students are quite beneficial to international applications in particular. So thank you very much for joining me tonight. I'm hoping that I will wrap up in about an hour. There is quite a bit of information for us to cover. I do feel it's important to go into some detail, but as always, if there's any questions, please feel free to reach out to me anytime so I can arrange a time to meet with you to discuss your daughter, her ambitions for post-secondary a bit further and more specifically as well. So to begin, university guidance at SMLS is really quite personalized. It starts as early as grade 8. Not to say that students need to have an understanding of where they're going and what they're doing at that time, but understanding the post-secondary landscape, especially if they're thinking about applying internationally, can be quite helpful to building a better sense of confidence by the time they're actually applying in the fall of their grade 12 year. There's a lot of higher education programming. In fact, I've already been in those MS8 classes a few weeks ago. I'll be returning to those classes this week and another time even before the winter holiday, but also higher education programming with our grade 9, 10, and 11 students, but also quite a bit with our grad seminar program, which takes place in grade 12, which covers most of our students' domestic applications, so Canadian applications. Therefore, because they're a bit more extensive, a lot of our university applications that are international do take place one-on-one, more so in my office, whether that be with devising a college list, brainstorming ideas for application prompts, or reaching out to teachers and discussing who would be best fit for letters of recommendation. I'm currently also working with students and preparing them for interviews, for alumni interviews and potential UK interviews as well. So there is quite a bit that runs out of my office as far as ensuring that students build the capacity, but also the ownership over their applications. There's so much time that needs to be invested in these types of applications, quite different from the Canadian system, if you're familiar with it. And that's why we start to have these conversations much earlier. I know that I extended an invitation to our middle school families, just to, again, understand what the journey ahead could potentially be like for you and your daughter. So I'd like to set the stage a bit by talking about how each university application really system compares. When we start with Canada, so our domestic applications, students are looking to apply to a 4-year undergraduate bachelor's degree program. And really, the preparation is not, it's fairly limited. Like I said, we do our applications in grad seminar in our grade 12 year, but a lot of the conversations have been had in advance, even of grade 12, so that when students are applying through OUAC, they're really confident. But it doesn't take the same sort of groundwork or foundational sort of work in preparing for the applications itself. The application on OUAC can take as little as 20 minutes because it's simply adding your choices to an electronic application. And then if a university is going to require supplements, that would actually come after the time of applications. Quite different in the UK and the US. Supplements are not necessarily a focus. The grades are, and very specifically grade 11 and 12 marks. For Canadian systems, universities are not looking at students' grade 9 or 10 marks, but are entirely focused on grade 11 and 12 and much more heavily focused on those grade 12 marks, whether they be completed in your grade 11 year or the midterm or grades that we would submit in a student's grade 12 year. Students can actually apply to multiple programs at any one university, very diverse breadth of application. At one institution, a student could apply to three very different programs and be admitted to all three because they're being reviewed independently for each of those programs. So students are actually declaring their major usually within their program of study, not at the time of application. Although when students apply, they may be asked to declare a major of interest, but they wouldn't be beholden to that should they decide to change their mind. So there's a lot of flexibility in the Canadian system, which is quite a contrast to our next system, which is the UK. I like to say that students should think of the UK not because they're first priority is studying geographically there, but because they absolutely are very much wanting to study a particular course of study. The application, in addition to the actual study, is very focused on a particular subject area. So it means that when a student is applying, they cannot apply to different subjects, but they would rather be applying to up to 5 schools in the same subject area. So a student could not apply to kinesiology and economics the way that she could here in Canada, but could only apply to, let's say, economics or kinesiology programs in the UK. And depending on whether she is looking to study in England or in Scotland, bachelor's undergraduate degrees are actually shorter in Scotland. So actually a student would actually be granted their degree in 3 years. It also does not permit as many elective options. Students are really going to be focused in those 3 or 4 years entirely on that course of study and won't necessarily have the same opportunities to study courses outside of that course. Evaluations are very heavily weighted usually on final exams. Some can even be as heavy as a 100% on one final exam. And depending on the institution, Oxbridge, for example, use a tutorial style. So it's not necessarily the same sort of large lecture style that a student would have in Canada, but they can still experience those in some institutions and some programs as well. So it also means that at the time of their application, they're actually declaring their course of study, or in this case, what that would be called is their major. And students really have a lot of challenge in trying to change that course of study once they're actually at the university. Now, at the other end of that spectrum, we have the US. And whereas the US really likes to look at a student and how they're going to contribute to the fabric of the community, much different from the UK, which is more evaluating the student for the fit for course of study. So US is really looking for fit of institution. So a student will be evaluated on what they're going to bring to the school. And it's a much larger holistic application. So there's a lot more variables that they're going to take into consideration, a lot more data points. And universities in the US are really going to take into consideration the student's whole transcript alongside a narrative arc that both the student and the school, so myself, shape together to kind of give the school, the university, a real idea of what this student is all about. There are opportunities for quite a bit of breadth in what they're going to study, especially in liberal arts schools, where students are going to be expected to be studying both arts and sciences, and really are expected to be using those if they anticipate applying into professional schools or like medical school or law school as well. Much like the Canadian system, their major is not declared, at admissions, but rather a little bit later, often in their second year, whereas in Canada, a major is typically declared at the end of a first year. And as mentioned, the UK is declared at the time of application. Now, what I'm going to be doing a bit more is just diving deeper into each of these applications, and we're going to start with the UK. As I've already noted, the system is quite a bit more focused than in Canada and in the US, and students are really going to be focused on an area of study or what they call courses of study. It also gives students, therefore, the opportunity to do pre-professional degrees in direct entry programs such as law, medicine, pharmacy, or veterinary medicine. And as I've mentioned, changing program is really quite a challenge. So students who may enter into their first year but have a change of heart would actually be potentially transferring either to another school in the UK or North America, but would the likelihood of courses transferring is actually can be fairly low. As I've mentioned, degrees look a little bit different in each England and in Scotland, but you really have to understand that what you're going to be going into is your focus, and you should really be intending to study and be happy to study nothing but that. Also, there's quite a bit of independent learning expectation that student is a bit more of a mature learner, engaging in tutorials one-on-one often with their tutors, their professors. And as well, students often don't realize that dormitories can be a bit different. Many schools do not have cafeterias, but students are actually expected to be cooking for themselves right from the start. So it can feel certainly quite a bit different, and I know that a lot of students often think the UK very similar feel to Canada, but it actually culturally can feel quite a bit different, and can be a lengthy plane ride back home. So I always say that students should really have a passion and a real interest to study something one in a very focused way, and with quite a bit of opportunities to engage in deep thinking, deep learning in that subject area with their tutors. The thing that also I think some students don't realize is research and their final project or a thesis. Either the third or fourth year in the UK often really does focus on a student diving deeply into research, which is not as typical here in Canada. And the school year often is a bit different. So students in the UK are actually starting school late September, as early as October, whereas in Canada, they're going to certainly be starting just after Labor Day. And students in Canada are also going to be wrapping up in April with their final exams, whereas the UK is going to go all the way into June. The application process is run through a system called UCAS. And it is one common application, much like OUAC, or the common application would be for the US. And this is where students would actually submit their application. And there are three major components to that. There is the academic information. Students are going to sit with me and enter their grade 11 and 12 completed marks to date, as well as courses in progress. And should a student have standardized testing, whether that be ACT, SAT, or APs, or anything that's required for the program of study, like an LSAT or a UCAT, that would also be included in that academic section. And students do complete that with me, so I can ensure that these grades are entered correctly. There's also a personal statement. It was revised this year so that students are answering three questions. Why are you interested in this course of study? What academic work have you done on this focused area of study? And what have you done outside of the classroom to explore this area of study? So this is why, because the application, this personal statement, is being sent to every school to which a student is applying, they cannot apply to both economics and kinesiology, because a reader is really looking at, okay, the student has applied to London School of Economics for economics, but they're talking about kinesiology. So that would be an automatic rejection, because it doesn't align. They don't understand why they're applying to economics. Coupled with that is a letter of recommendation that is written by me with information from the sometimes the student's professional internship supervisor in many cases, and the teachers that of the subject areas in which the student is going into, all framed around the student's um, how suitable they are for this course of study. So if they are applying into direct entry medicine, I'll be speaking with our biology teacher, potentially chemistry, math, understanding how strong they are as an academic, but also I would assume that potentially their professional internship allowed them to have some experience in a clinic or some sort of patient-facing care. And that would allow me to embed some of that into my counselor letter as well. So the letter for UCAS is not just academically oriented, but really is giving them a fulsome picture of the characteristics that the school would be looking for in a direct entry medical applicant. So communication, collaboration, conflict resolution, empathy, maturity. Those are all sort of key words that I'd make sure to be embedding into my letter of recommendation. Final submission is completed by me, so students would submit their application through UCAS, usually with my eyes on it numerous times, and then I would add predicted grades. So the UK is a little bit different in that universities are going to receive predicted grades at the time of application based on historical data that we have from the students' previous coursework, as well as their current coursework to date. And that will be a predicted final grade. So what we're doing is predicting a student's grade in June. Of course, offers made are conditional on meeting the conditions of either an offer that's extended based on the Ontario curriculum, so their OSSD graduation requirements, so those predicted grades, or universities can actually extend offers based on advanced placement results to date. Important to note about advanced placement is that most universities are not going to review AP results in grades 9 and 10. And the reason for that is that they want to see the academic rigor in their final 2 years of school. Oxbridge and Cambridge and Oxford, if they're asking for 5 APs out of 5, taking them over 3-4 years, to them doesn't exemplify rigor. They're wanting to see those 5s coming in grades 11 and 12. And so when a student is extended an offer, we've had a student who's received a handful of offers already this year, which is great. A few of those were based entirely on OSSD predicted grades, and the conditions of her offer were noted in that, as well as one of those happened to be on whether or not she achieved the scores we predicted this year for her that she'll be writing in May. So it can be dependent on what a school is looking at, and there can be a bit of strategic conversation on whether we request that a student is reviewed as their OSSD or APs, or a combination of both. Depending on where the student is applying to and to which programs, universities have 2 different deadlines. So this year for Oxbridge, and this is every year, is October 15th, as well as any veterinary medicine, law, or direct entry medicine. Those programs do have an October 15th deadline as well. The reason is those schools and those programs, in addition to the UCAS application, often have interviews or admissions tests as well. So they need additional time as they're reviewing those applications to have shortlist timing for when they're actually, before they're extending offers of admission. Offers can come out at any time. For Oxbridge, particularly, those come about a month and a bit. So end of January, after the shortlisted students are interviewed in mid-December. So speaking of Oxbridge, if you aren't familiar, Oxford and Cambridge, students are unable to apply to both, but can apply to one. So a student really needs to have a good idea of which would be the right fit for them and what courses are actually available to them as well. The interesting thing about Oxbridge is that students are not actually applying to Oxford or Cambridge, but they're applying to a college within the institution. So when a student applies, they actually have to indicate the college to which they would like to apply. And that college will actually independently review their application and make an admissions decision themselves. Not all colleges have all courses of study. We do have students who go in without preference for a college. There's no advantage to that because what happens is that the system will just randomly assign a student a college. So some students think, oh, it'll put me in the pool that has the lowest number of applicants for my course of study. Nope, that's not the case. If a college does decide to pass on an applicant, but they feel that they're a really strong candidate, they can actually put them back into the general pool in another college who may not have had many applicants for that course of study can actually pick them up out of that as well. So what's really critical is that knowing that your college is where you apply, but also equally important is that's where you're going to live, and that's usually where your classes are going to run out of, and that will be your tutor system. So your classes at both Oxford and Cambridge are going to be tutorial seminar style, so much smaller classes, maybe 4, 5, 6 students, or maybe even courses in which you're one-on-one with a tutor. Oxford and Cambridge do typically require students to have level 5s, typically 5 of them, not necessarily at the time of application, but they should be predicted at 5s for their grade 12 year. So that's why I would say that if your daughter is in grade 11 and is considering Oxford, hopefully by this point we've had a conversation about their interest in Oxford, and I can dive more deeply into their AP intentions. Just a note on AP, I'll talk about this when I get into the US, but really APs are significant for the UK, insignificant in the Canadian system, and somewhat significant in the US. So oftentimes students think that they need APs for applications, and it turns out they're really focused on Canadian schools. It can certainly better prepare them for university, but in the case of a place like Oxford or Cambridge, the reason they're utilizing APs is that that ensures that our students are best prepared for the rigor of their academic study, especially because students in the UK have A levels. So that's APs are sort of the closest equivalency that students in Canada and students at SMLS would have as a comparative tool for admissions reps. This is a general timeline. You notice that as you progress from 9 into 10 and 10 into 12, what you have to be doing, it goes a little bit deeper. And I don't even include grade 12 in this because a lot of the work really needs to be front loaded. I still strongly believe that students in grade 9 still need to be kids and enjoy themselves and not just be focused entirely on academics, although important, of course. It's really that the groundwork is working really hard in your grade 9 courses, developing really good work habits, really good time management skills, because the more you add in academically, the more challenging it can be. So it's not just about your high marks, it's really about your ability to manage a few different things and managing some very course specific, maybe extracurriculars or club investigation that will come into play really in grade 10. Because the personal statement really expects students to dive deeply into showing how they have extended their learning beyond the classroom, we talk a lot about in between grades 10 and 11 being an important year for summer programming. I sent to students today our current SMLS Summer Enrichment Guide, yes, for summer 2026, and that will be sent out to families soon as well. Many programs still don't have their updated information, but some programs are already open for registration, with some closing as early as January. So I like to really make sure that students are thinking ahead, doing well in their current courses and doing well with what they're doing now, but thinking ahead and making a plan. Knowing that plans can change, but just sort of not waiting until the last minute, because that can really cause a lot of stress. In grade 11 is when we get a lot more serious, right? We really need to understand why you're applying to the schools and programs and what program you're really applying into. That usually goes hand in hand with conversations with the Global Citizenship Department to understand how we can leverage our professional internship. So students, when they're applying, can talk about real experience that they've had in the field of study that they're intending to apply into. And really evaluating courses. So I've started meeting with my grade 11s about US, UK already. And we've started talking about courses for next year, making a plan of action so that in our next meetings, we're going over courses of study, or sorry, courses for next year, generally making a final plan, but then diving more deeply into our applications as well. Something just to note about the UK, they really like to see extensions of learning academically in ways such as podcasts that the student listens to, books that they have read. So it's really, they like to understand where the student's curiosity has led them, and ways in which they've satisfied or scratched that itch for learning something that they wanted to learn about independently, and where did they seek out that information? How did they find experts in that field? I think that becomes a really important thing in between grades 10 into 11, and then throughout the grade 11 year, and then between grades 11 and 12 as well. Students in grade 11 for the UK start having conversations with me at the end of the school year about their personal statement and their course list. And then they have work that they are having to do over the summer holidays, so that when we're coming back into August, students will meet with me before they come back to school. They'll have a one-on-one, usually 1 hour meeting with me to discuss the status of their application and what's next steps we need to do as we head into the school year. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about direct entry programs because they are very unique. As I said, there's law, medicine, dentistry, and veterinary medicine. Some pathways back to Canada, particularly in medicine, exist. So I'll talk about that just in a moment as well. But students who are looking at law, I just say that there are pathways back to studying in Canada, but they are limited, and they are exceptionally limited for dentistry. In fact, there's only one school that has direct entry out of high school. Otherwise, there are 5-year dental programs that do have pathways back to study, to practice in Canada, but they do require an undergraduate degree. So a student would actually have to do a 4-year degree in Canada, or a 3-year degree if they wanted to go over to the UK, and then do a 5-year dentistry program. Those exist in Ireland, but in the UK, they're fewer and farther between. Veterinary medicine, on the other hand, is a very popular choice that in Australia, and they do have pathways back to Canada as well. As noted, that a lot of these schools and programs do require a standardized test, most commonly the UCAT for dentistry and medicine, and then the LNAT for law. Because we've had a pretty solid interest in dentistry over the past years, I've had students going to the UK and Ireland all 4 years since I've started here at SMLS. It's really important to note that this does not mean it's an easier route, but rather most appropriate for students who know that medicine is what they want. So in the UK and in Ireland, in both instances, these are 6-year programs in which you are not required to write an MCAT, and are either a 6-year full program or a 3-in-3 program. Just as an example, we have a student currently in first year at St. Andrews for direct entry medicine. She'll be doing 3 years there in an undergraduate Bachelor of Science in Medicine, and then we'll spend the next 3 years at the University of Edinburgh in their medical school. All the while, she'll be returning to Canada because it's a special Canadian pathway, and attending classes at the University of Alberta, building a network there to help support her transition to return back to Canada. In the United Kingdom, if you're applying to direct entry programs, you can only apply to 4, even though you have the ability to apply to 5 if you are not applying to a direct entry program. It's only 4 for direct entry. They much exactly like the regular UCAS application, they are looking at an academic profile, your personal statement and counselor reference, but the focus is entirely going to be on those maths and sciences. They want to make sure that you have the grades in those courses in particular. Now in Ireland, you'd use a platform called Atlantic Bridge. There are 4 schools that students can apply to in Ireland. I know it says 3, but there's RCSI Dublin and RCSI Bryant. And then there's also the University of Galway and University College Dublin. We have students in first, second, and third year at RCSI, student in third year at UCD. So it's a very popular pathway. And much like the UCAS application, it does require an academic profile and a personal statement. However, 2 letters of recommendation. So this is not coming from the counselor. It's not coming from me. 1 letter will historically have come from a math or science teacher. Our math and science teachers are very popular and have lots of letters that they're writing in the fall each year. And then usually 1 external source, most commonly coming from the placement supervisor from where the student was in their professional internship. So we've had students in physiotherapy clinics and then apply to direct entry medicine, and the supervisor was able to really talk about the students' one-on-one patient care, developing a hand strengthening tool and a guide for parents. So there's a really lovely conversation about the application and the ways in which the student was really showcasing the characteristics that they would be looking for in a physician. So a big thing about our professional internship that I think is a real benefit for our students is, yes, absolutely, they get the experience of whether or not this is an area that they'd like to pursue post-secondary or career-wise, but also the benefit of getting letters of recommendation that can be utilized for their applications later on. All right, we're going to shift gears a little bit after I talk about timeline. Students really need to think about ways in which they're getting some patient care and not necessarily just rely on professional internship for direct entry, whether that be direct entry, medicine or law or anything else. So summer program become a lot more important for students who are considering pursuing these pathways. And obviously really important to think about what their grade 11 courses are going to look like. Students are surprised when I say that they don't have to have grade 11 physics. Can it be a benefit? Absolutely. But it's not going to be a requirement. So we always want to talk about whether it's a strategic advantage to be taking grade 11 and or grade 12 physics. Although I certainly think that any student who's thinking about going into medicine should consider taking grade 11 physics. They're going to encounter that material on the MCAT, and it can also better prepare them for calculus and vectors. But if they're not really the strongest math student and they don't enjoy math, then that's something we may not consider simply, even though it may be advantageous for an application. We really want to consider the rigor of their academic courses. And so conversations really need to be discussed about whether or not it's advantageous for advanced placement, and when and what they would be taking, given their interest, and it's university level material. So it's all sort of dependent on where their focus is. Okay. So studying in the US, quite a bit of a shift, very different, as I mentioned at the outset of the presentation. Whereas the UK is entirely focused on the suitability of your fit for the course of study, the US will evaluate you with the lens of what is your suitability for contributing to the school community in a meaningful way. So I always say that students need to think about not necessarily just the name of the school, but what is the school culture? What's the school vibe? Are they going to be like Dartmouth that really loves experiential outdoor experiences? In fact, you have to pass a swim test in order to graduate from Dartmouth. Or if you're interested in Boston College, which has a core curriculum. So there are certain courses that you must take no matter what faculty you're in or what program you're studying in order to graduate. Or Brown, which has an open curriculum, and in your first year, a pass fail. So open curriculum is entirely open to you. There aren't prescribed courses you're having to take. The student really needs to understand the school culture, because a lot of these schools, which are liberal arts focused, there's so much broad opportunities to explore numerous areas of interests, a variety of ways in which that is taught. Sarah Lawrence College students take 2 courses over an 8-week period in small cohorts with a large thesis presentation at the end. One of those can be co-op opportunities in which they're actually commuting into New York City and getting credit for that. So I think that students really need to dive into what it means to be a student on that campus and whether that's something that they feel that would be the right fit for them. Important to note is that when students and families hear the word college in the US, it is not the same as college here in Canada. Your typical diploma granting institutions like colleges in Canada are actually called community colleges in the US. A college like Bowdoin College, Hamilton College, Sarah Lawrence College all refer to undergraduate focused schools. So their entire focus and the majority of their student body is going to be undergraduates. It usually means as well that they're much smaller than especially like an R1 research university. But it doesn't mean that research or great opportunities aren't abound at these colleges either. So sometimes students wonder about what does it mean if a school is a college. It's just that the focus is on the undergraduate experience, which I think there's absolutely benefits to colleges that are going to be entirely focused on students in their cohort. Much like the UK, there is a pretty serious financial commitment to attend. Merit-based scholarships do exist. It is even possible to reach out to the financial aid office after a student has been admitted to request additional scholarship funds should it be necessary. We had a student who did that last year. In fact, they had not accepted their offer. It was getting into the early spring, and the dean of admissions actually reached out to her and said, we'd love to know if there's a reason why you haven't picked us yet. And she told them that it simply was, would love to have a better scholarship, and they made it work for her. So there is flexibility. Unless a student is a dual citizen, they cannot apply for FAFSA, so the federal financial aid. But if a student is a dual citizen, so if your daughter does have Canadian US citizenship, they would still be applying as an international applicant. They would be reviewed as an international applicant, but they could be extended an offer that would include domestic fees. Depends on the state that a student resides in and whether they're applying to a public or private institution. So, a University of Michigan applicant who has citizenship in Florida would still be charged the same because it's an out-of-state tuition versus in-state tuition. So important to note is if your daughter does have dual citizenship, there may be additional opportunities for scholarships or FAFSA funding as well. And there are thousands of universities in the US. There's 22 in Ontario, and I'm very familiar with them all. I'm familiar with a lot of US universities and colleges, but not all. So therefore, I think that it's really good to find fit, start with a certain list, and then have a conversation with me so that I can extend and develop that list a little bit further. Oftentimes we start with certain names of schools, and that's perfectly fine, but I always ask the student, well, why is this a school that you're so interested in? And oftentimes it has to do with a name that they've heard of or something that they've seen in media, admittedly. And so I always say you got to understand the number of schools that are out there and the number of different schools that could be the right fit for you. And the more we get to know them and get to know them earlier, because a lot of those universities in the application might ask them a question, why us? And if they haven't really thought about that too deeply, or their answer has been because it's in New York City and I want to live in New York, it's going to make the application process a little more challenging. And that's not something that a student should be thinking of as late as the summer before grade 12. They really should be thinking about that in grade 11 as we're finalizing the list, hopefully by the end of grade 11, really diving into researching grades 9 and 10, and then maybe going and visiting some schools in between grades 10 and 11 or throughout grade 11 to really, again, identify what's the campus fit, what's the best place for them, because the likelihood is that they're going to have to tell the school that in their application when they're applying in their grade 12 year. So when we talk about a holistic admissions approach, it means that universities are not looking for one thing necessarily. What they're trying to do is understand your story. And it's my job as the university guidance counselor to really ensure that the student's narrative, their story is clear. So I become a real instrumental part of developing that narrative arc a little bit and ensuring that we're amplifying components of the student's application in a certain way or explaining some things as well. So there's a student's academic, so that's part one. That's going to be the student's entire transcript, everything that is at a grade 9 level all the way through to the end of grade 11. If a student is applying in the early rounds, they're not going to be submitting necessarily any grades for grade 12, so admissions is actually going to be based on completed grades to date. But also a part of that would be standardized testing. Students may apply to schools that are test optional. I am of the mind that a standardized test can certainly benefit an application if a student's able to do well on a standardized test. So the phrase students hear me use all the time is the juice worth the squeeze? So is the amount of effort you're going to have to put into preparing for an ACT or an SAT going to produce the outcome that we're hoping to provide? Many schools are starting to go back to tests, and I'll talk to that in a moment. And it's really important for students to think about when they're going to be doing those tests. I often say that students should be looking to sit a test in between grades 10 and 11 or in the first half of their grade 11 year, depending on which math level they're at. So academics are sort of one component with their transcript and standardized tests. And the thing about standardized tests is that they validate a student's report. So if a student is very successful on a transcript and they have a very successful standardized test, it shows that that validates those marks that the reader is reading on the student's application. The other major piece of the puzzle is what the school has to say about the student. So that's the letters of recommendation, typically 1 or 2 letters of recommendation. Most commonly, we're submitting 2. Most universities will accept 2 here and there. NYU, a few others really only look at 1. So we need to be strategic on which one we're submitting there. But usually we can have 2. It can be from the same subject area. I like to have diversity, but again, it depends on what a student's applying to. A student applying to NYU, one is at Stern, so for business, and one is at Clive Davis for performance. Those teacher recommendations can look very different from each other. So it's really in the context of what they are applying as to what we want the teachers to be leveraging. Certain schools really like students to have research experience. So I really get the teachers to talk about critical thinking, inquisitiveness, curiosity, things that they've sort of shown in class beyond just providing a report of how they did in their classes. Teachers will also talk a lot about collaboration in math classes. That's a very common thing that students are engaging in collaborative work, problem solving at whiteboards, and that's something that the math teachers will often talk about. Of course, in other areas, they talk about them in other ways too. Then there's finally what the student has to say about themselves. And there's 2 parts of that. There's extracurricular, so the activities section of the common application. So that's the most common application that students are going to be using. The activity section allows students to put up to 10 activities. If a student doesn't have 10, that's perfectly fine. What they're looking for is consistency and impact. So when students are describing what they've done, it's not just a description of what the swim team meant, but did they win any awards? Did they get anything around most improved athlete? In what ways were they an important part of the leadership team or really reliable? So it's really about highlighting not just what they've done, but again, what they've done with those experiences. And amplifying them. So I do have special workshops that I do with the students. This year I had happened to be NYU. NYU come in and talk specifically about leveraging the activity section and how students can really, it's not about doing 10 different things. It's really about diving deeply into important things. So this is why I started with saying consistency is super important. Doing something over a long period of time, not necessarily doing a different counsel every single year and only putting that you were doing that for 1 year. That's not what they're looking for. They're wanting to see a commitment to something and then some sort of impact. Doesn't have to be substantial necessarily, but what is it that how have you developed, but also what have you done? And then personal essays. So there is typically your common application essay, which is 650 words or less on a topic that the student chooses. Can be anything from a personal narrative about a recipe that is meaningful to them. It could be an identity question, something that they've learned from their parents, a book that they read that was really important to them. The sky is entirely the limit, as long as the student is answering the question. And I help students start devising those ideas before the summer. And the expectation is that they're coming back from their summer holiday with a first draft. Even if they're applying regular decision, the summer is the best time for them to be creatively expressing themselves and diving into this application because heaven knows grade 12 is busy. So giving themselves, yes, a rest, but spending some time really diving into the common application, not leaving this to the very end. I won't let them, is just so important. Then, in addition to the personal essay, there's also school-specific essays. So you have the common application, and that would be submitted to every single school to which a student has applied. And then the school-specific essays, which can have additional essays or none. Northeastern doesn't have any. Other schools have numerous, 4 or 5 essays that could ask, why us? Tell us about a part of your identity that's meaningful for you. Tell us about being a bridge builder. Whole host of different things that the university is using because they're trying to understand the student, trying to understand the applicant, and on a deeper level, again, the things that they would be looking for, the characteristics that they would be looking for in someone who's going to contribute meaningfully to their school community. So there are a few different application systems. The most common that students will be using is the Common Application. Over 800 colleges and universities utilize this. So it's a one-stop shop for students to apply to upwards of 20 universities. But then there are schools like UC California, SUNY, some University of Texas schools that you actually have to apply to their system directly. And they don't use the common application. Georgetown is also one of the ones. MIT. These are schools that don't use the common application, but you'd have to apply separately directly to the school. And important to note is there are 3 primary pools in which students can apply. There is early decision. Generally speaking, that is going to be a November 1st deadline. Again, that's generally speaking, so I'm doing a bit of broad brush strokes here, but universities allow students to apply for this November 1st deadline, and they will give students either an admittance, a rejection, or a deferral to the regular decision pool in mid-December. So the turnaround time is about a month and a half that students would actually have an admissions decision, either, as I said, an offer, a rejection, or a deferral. Students who apply early decision are committing to that school if they are admitted. So if a student is admitted in that December, they must withdraw all of their applications. There is a requirement for parents, the student, and myself to sign off on this in the common application, stating explicitly that we all understand that should the student be admitted, they will attend, and that they are required to withdraw all of their applications. Not all schools have early decisions. Some offer early action or restrictive early action. Again, generally speaking, that's November 1st, although some schools like UNC Chapel Hill has an October 15th deadline, or some like Parsons have a little bit of a later early action of November 15th. So it does vary, but generally speaking, we're looking at November 1st. Early action, students will hear as early as mid-December all the way into the end of January. So they are being reviewed on final grade 11 and final grades altogether. And then they can often request midterm reports or progress reports as early as end of November. Those schools who are early action are not going to require a student to attend if they're extended an offer. So whereas early decision is binding, you will attend that school. Early action students have the flexibility to wait and see what other schools they get into in their other rounds and make a decision later on around May 1st. Restrictive early action is a little bit trickier in that it is much like early decision. You can only apply to one if it is restrictive, or single choice. They call it either single choice or restrictive early action. And in that case, you are not bound to attend the school, but you cannot apply to other schools, either ED and or at all. So so Harvard has restrictive early action, meaning that you cannot apply to any other ED schools or any other private institutions, but you can apply to public institutions like University of Michigan, Purdue, UNC Chapel Hill. So that's a bit of a way around it. Single choice early action means that you can apply to another school early decision, but you cannot apply to any other early action schools. Alternatively, and this is most common for our students, they will apply to an early decision school and then multiple early actions. So if a student does want to apply early and a school has early action and we deem them a strong candidate for an earlier offer, we would say you should be applying in the early action round. Students would only apply early decision if they absolutely knew that that was their top choice school, because they would be attending that school should they get an offer of admission. They're unable to wait, to hold on to their offer, to see if they get in other places, whether that be in EA or regular decision. Finally, and students can choose not to apply early at all, but instead to only go regular decision. These are usually around a January 1st, January 5th, depending on the school deadline. It is over the winter holiday. Application is the same. It's just being submitted at a later time, which does give students a little bit more of a runway if they feel that their application is going to be stronger a little bit later in the school year. So students every year apply either all entirely regular decision, or sometimes we have students who are not successful with their early decision, and then they want to put forward additional applications to regular decision. A student who applies only early action can also apply regular decision. A student who applies a student who's applying early decision and is rejected or deferred to regular decision can apply to regular decision schools as well. So the tricky thing is the timeline, because I currently have grade 12s who have applied to early decision schools in early action, but they aren't sure if they're going to be hearing that they were successful. And because these applications are fairly substantial, I am currently working with them for their January 1st deadlines, even though they may be getting in early decision, at which point they simply would not submit those applications. But with the chance that they may be rejected or deferred, we're putting together those applications so that they're ready to go once we have the admissions decision in hand. So again, the Common Application is the main system upon which students are going to complete the application. It is very meaty, very substantial. It is where I'm going to upload the school report, the student's transcript, my letter of recommendation, and then teachers are also going to upload their letters of recommendation. But it's also a system through which I can monitor and see the students' applications, see how they're doing, see where they're going, and where they may need some additional support as well. So the SAT and the ACT, these are standardized tests that have been around for the SAT for about 100 years and the ACT since about the 1950s. The reason why you may have only heard of the SAT and not the ACT is twofold. The SAT is run through the College Board, and the College Board is wonderful at marketing and being very heavily involved in standardized testing. They also run the PSAT. They run AP. So there's a familiarity for sure that students and parents have. It also is more familiar for many because it used to be the preferred test of the Ivy League schools and any schools on the East and West Coast. So even Stanford and any schools like USC, they did prefer them when everyone was test required. That has definitely changed over the past 20 years. Universities no longer prefer one test over the other. But I think that a lot of families still think that the preferred test is the SAT, but that's not it at all. The reason I bring this up is that there are a number of universities that have returned to test required during the pandemic and post-pandemic. They toyed around with the idea of test optional, and in the follow-up monitoring and research that the more competitive and rigorous schools they did note that students were better prepared for academic rigor if they submitted standardized test scores. So many institutions, so Georgetown, Harvard, MIT, there's UT Austin, in fact, also number of schools have reinstated the standardized test, but very notably do not state whether they do not prefer one or the other. If a school is test optional, it means that they can submit it and they will look at it if you want them to. Test blind, like University of California schools, will not review them even if you try to send them. So most schools are test optional or test required, but then there are a few that are test blind. So it's important to know as well whether you're going to need to write a standardized test. Again, if the juice is worth the squeeze. We do offer preparation for the 8-9 and for the NMSQT. So students in grades 8 and grade 9 and grade 10 and grade 11 had the option of writing one of those two tests at the end of October. And I'm currently I just received the results 2 weeks ago, and I'm just finalizing some meetings with students where I've been meeting with them one-on-one to talk about why they wanted to take the 8-9 or the NMSQT, to decode and talk about their results and how they can improve, and to start the conversation about overall the timeline for their US application, or potentially for the UK if they thought that they wanted to get a feel for whether an SAT might be helpful for them there. I just want to make a note about the ACT, which is my personal preference, and I just want to take a moment to kind of talk about that test. The digital SAT, that standardized test changed a couple of years ago. I think it was in 2022, March 2022 or March 2023. It went from a paper-based 3-hour test to a computer adaptive 2-hour and 14-minute test. And what's important to note about the SAT is it's split into 2 sections, so reading and writing, and then mathematics. But within those 2 sections, there are modules. So a student will start the test and they will encounter some challenging and some not so challenging questions. And at the end of that module, the computer will put them into either a more challenging second module, which will have a floor for how low their grade can go, or an easier second module that will actually give them a ceiling for how high their mark can go. So this is computer adaptive technology, where they are in real time evaluating the students' responses and then determining which module they're going to go into in the second piece. Personally, I find that students have to be very strategic on how they do well out of the gate in each of those sections. I also find that people call it tricky, but only because I think that the challenge is so variable in the types of questions that they're encountering. So I find that students can certainly prepare for the SAT, but I always encourage students, especially if they're doing well on an SAT, to try the ACT. So it's called the Enhanced ACT because it is new in Canada as of September. I haven't had anyone write this test just yet, but I have students who are intending to register and write in the new year. The ACT used to be a computer-based test, but was 3 hours in length. They have completely revised the test to feel a bit more like the SAT. And in doing so, I think have made it a lot more approachable. I have found that at my previous school 10 years ago, 9 out of 10 students, I worked at an all-girls school, so 9 out of 10 girls were writing the ACT and doing very well, finding really great success. Because the digital SAT came out and was shorter, everyone wanted to write the shorter test, and understandably so. I think the pendulum is going to swing a little bit when students really understand what the ACT is about. The students have the option of writing a fourth section. Otherwise, there are three sections, English, math, and then reading, and that would be 2 hours and 5 minutes. And then if they decided to add in the science section, which is optional, and it's really only required by a very few schools, and if a student is applying to science, so Caltech and applying to science, they would probably expect you to write the science on this section. But the science isn't biology, chemistry, physics. It is more scientific inquiry and data analysis. So students actually find that it's fun, surprisingly, and appreciate it. Most students are writing it on a computer, but there is the option to do a paper test, I think, at some test centers still. Important to note about the SAT, it's out of 1,600 now, so you may have known that it was once included writing, so that you may have been familiar with 2,400. It's now 1,600, so 800 and 800. And the ACT is out of 36, but they take an average of each section out of 36. So your composite score, if you don't do well in one section, but you do really well in the other two, can actually balance things out. So I had a student who really heavily prepared for the SAT, wanted to get as close of a perfect score as she could, decided to switch over to the ACT after doing a mock and really liking the test. And after her first sit, got a 36. So she got a perfect score in her first sit, which would have been a lot more challenging to get on an SAT. So I say all this knowing that you can certainly do preparation for the SAT. There's transferable skills over to the ACT. I always say start with an SAT and then you can always move over to that after conversations with me. But just wanted to give a bit of a perspective on a test that a lot of students and families aren't as familiar with, that I think definitely has a lot of pros to it. The timeline for applying to the US, much like the UK, where you're really focused on your coursework in grade 10, gets quite a bit more serious in grade 9. In grade 10 gets a bit more serious because if a standardized test is coming into play, there needs to be some preparation over the grade 10 year and throughout the summer between grades 10 and 11 to either sit a test in August of the student's year before grade 11 or December and into March. And the reason is that a student's grade 11 year at SMLS is pretty busy. You're taking grade 12 level courses. Some may be taking 1, 2, 3, even 4 grade 12 level courses. So the workload is heavier. Our school year ends in May, so it's a bit more of a compressed academic calendar. Students may be doing APs at that time, so attending morning classes. There's a lot on the go. And keep in mind that this sort of preparation is not needed for Canadian schools. So I think it's really important understanding if this is something you really want to commit to over a good 3+ years of your time. Really spending time with me one-on-one and in higher education becomes so important. Knowing what your thoughts are, what your questions are. Where do you think you might want to go and why? I had a student, I will never forget that she, with an imaginary line across the bottom of the United States said, "Ms. Bryant, don't show me any schools that have snow." And she ended up at the University of Miami, no surprise. But to her, she was looking for a US collegiate experience, but she also was really looking forward to having the opportunity to be in the Sunshine State. So I think that there's a lot of things that as a family, our students need to talk to their parents about. There's the financial commitment that's a part of it too. But I think open dialogue and really good conversations happen early. knowing that you can change your mind. Every year I have students for whom they've been preparing for the US, and when it comes down to the application, they realize that they don't want to be as far from home, perhaps, as they thought that they initially did. And that's fine too. I think going through the process can be certainly educational and really beneficial to understanding what they want and what they're really looking for in post-secondary. I'm just going to very briefly talk about NCAA. We happen to have a student who will be attending a US school on a Division I scholarship, has already signed a letter of intent. We had been working together since her grade 9 year, so it is a long, lengthy process. I just want to let you know that the school's role, so my role, is on the academic side. So I work with the student alongside ensuring that it's the right academic fit because God forbid something happen and they get injured, they still have to want to be at that school. And then usually the coach for whatever sport the student is in usually has a good has a pulse on whether they would be Division I, Division II, or Division III. So what you see here on the screen, all students can apply for a free profile page if they aren't sure as to whether they would be Division I, II, or III, which most students at the onset of their NCAA journey aren't sure. And they can go from Division III into Division I. So I always say start with the free profile page. Have a conversation with me to also be mapping out and planning whether you are eligible to be a part of our elite performer program. So that is open to students who are heavily invested in time as either an athlete or a performer or something that takes quite a bit of their time, 15 hours per week or more. And they can talk to me about a reduction in course load and whether or not that would benefit them to make sure that they have the time to spend on their sport or their activity. I won't go into detail about the other two profiles, just to say that if you are in grades 9 or 10 or even 11, and you are considering NCAA, we should probably meet early in the school year to sort of just map out what your timeline is going to be looking like in regards to reaching out to coaches, and to also make sure that I'm able to get you on the NCAA eligibility site and also get your transcript. So when you are reaching out to coaches, they have that academic information. So our grade 11, so our SS11 professional internship, if you are not familiar with it, takes place in the last 4 weeks of a student's grade 11 year. We have been doing this for numerous years. It is one of our signature programs, and there is no school that I am aware of that has anything like this. Public schools do have co-op programming, but it looks radically different. They're often not in the same professional communities that we have partnerships with, and they're often sporadic with only a couple times a week. Our professional internship is actually a 4-week full-time credit experience. So a student who is embarking on their co-op journey may be traveling on the GO train to go to downtown Toronto to an architecture firm, and they're excited, and maybe they're wearing a nice blouse or even a suit that they've bought, and they're having a real workplace experience. They're getting to potentially sit in on meetings. They may have some, less exciting things that's going to give them insight into certain aspects of day-to-day running of a firm. But it gives them a real opportunity to spend an extended period of time, like I said, over about 4 weeks, in a regular full-time placement. This is organized through our Global Citizenship Department. They have a co-op teacher, either Ms. Anderson or Mr. Dittmer, will actually work with the student to identify a placement for them. Students will develop a resume, a cover letter, and actually engage in an interview for their placement. So they're getting some really great experience in talking about themselves, which is something that students applying to the US and UK are going to have to do time and time and numerous times and again. um, and what's also noted is that this is a credit course. So these students will usually have 7 courses on their normal full year timetable. And then this is an additional 8th course that they will receive credit for. And the tie back will actually be to something that they took in their grade 11 year. So a student who did do the architecture placement last year tied it back to grade 12 art. And so they received an additional grade 12 art credit for that. We do have partnerships with, numerous organizations and companies, but families can also seek out their own opportunities, or if they have family connections, those are also on the table as well. But should a family not have any connections or not wish to pursue that, we can certainly work with the student with our own partnerships. With that being said, if you happen to being in an organization or know one that would welcome our students, looking for very mature, responsible students who would engage in a professional internship from the very beginning to about the end of June. I'm sure our Global Citizenship Department would love to have a conversation. They're starting to finalize some of those partnerships for our current grade 11 students. So I'm sure that that would be something that they would love to hear about as well. For the US, this is usually somewhere in their activity section, and or their co-op supervisor may also write a letter of recommendation in support of a professional program that would be that they would be applying to. For the UK, oftentimes it is them talking about very specific opportunities that they've had to be able to leverage on their application, and or their co-op supervisor is often providing me with details on how this would be their aptitude for this course of study. So whether the student is utilizing it in their actual application or whether it is being used as a tool to leverage a recommendation, we certainly have, it's a really great piece of a puzzle for students' application, whether they're applying to the US or the UK. So that's it for my presentation today. Over an hour. If you have any questions, my contact information is here. Please reach out anytime. I would love to have a conversation about where your daughter is at, where she might be wanting to go, and how I may help. I'm also including here contact information for Mr. Mark Brims. He's our senior school principal, and he's also happy to help about any or answer any questions about our curriculum and pathway programming in the senior school.